In every age, people have asked the same questions. What is the good life? How should we treat one another? What does it mean to be free or virtuous or just? What does it mean to be human? Western moral philosophy for beginners and Selenius Media takes you on a guided journey through the minds that shaped the moral backbone of the West, from the earliest Greek thinkers to the modern age. Lived stories of struggle, ambition, conflict, revelation, all unfolding against the sweep of history. If you've ever wanted to understand philosophy clearly, calmly, and humanly, if you want to know not just what these thinkers argued, but why it mattered, follow Western Moral Philosophy for Beginners today and explore 10 more podcasts at Selenius Media. Aristotle begins his ethical inquiry with a broad, almost biological map of human action. Every art, every investigation, every choice and pursuit, he says, aims at some good. Even when people act badly, they act towards something that appears good to them in the moment. Ethics, therefore, is not first about rules descending from the sky. It is about orientation. What are we aiming at? And what kind of person must we become to aim well? The way Aristotle frames the question already tells you what sort of thinker he is. He is not interested in policing single acts as if morality were a courtroom. He is interested in understanding the shape of a human life. He also issues a warning that feels strikingly modern. Do not demand more precision than the subject permits. Ethics deals with human life, not with triangles. We are variable, situational, pushed by moods and circumstances, entangled in histories. The best ethical account will be true for the most part, not in every case. If you expect an algorithm for virtue, you will miss what virtue is. Aristotle wants principles, yes, but he wants them to serve judgment, not replace it. The point of studying ethics is not to win arguments, it is to live better. Philosophy, for him, is practical medicine for the soul. So he asks the foundational question: what is the highest good human beings seek? If every action aims at some good, there must be some ultimate end that we seek for its own sake, and for the sake of which we seek other things. Money is sought for what it buys, health for what it enables, honor for what it represents. But the final end is sought simply because we want it. Aristotle calls this end eudaimonia, often translated as happiness. Yet that translation hides the depth of his idea. Eudaimonia is not a passing feeling. It is flourishing, living well and doing well, the condition of a whole life that makes sense and is worth having. It is closer to a life going right than to a smile. What makes this end distinctive is its stability and completeness. We choose eudaimonia for itself. We want other things because we think they will contribute to flourishing. And we want flourishing because it is the name for a life with nothing vital missing. Aristotle notices that people disagree about what flourishing consists in. Some say pleasure, some honor, some wealth, some power. But he thinks most of these candidates fail because they are too dependent on fortune or too shallow to be final. Pleasure is real, but it comes and goes. Honor depends on other people's judgments. Wealth is plainly a tool. Power is empty without goodness. Aristotle wants a good that is self-sufficient, stable, and complete. To clarify what flourishing is, Aristotle offers what has become known as the function argument. Every being and every tool can be understood by its function, what it is for, what activity expresses its nature. A knife cuts, a heart makes music, an eye sees. Being a good knife or a good eye has to do with performing that function excellently. If human beings have a characteristic function, then human flourishing must be the excellent performance of it. What function belongs to humans as humans? Not mere life, because plants live. Not sensation alone, because animals sense. What is left is rational activity, living through reason. Our distinctively human work is to think, deliberate, choose, and order desire by understanding. If that is the function, then human flourishing is rational activity performed excellently. Two details matter here. First, rational activity includes more than abstract thinking. It includes choosing well, desiring well, feeling well. Human beings are not minds trapped in bodies. They are integrated souls whose reasoning should shape appetite, anger, fear, joy. Second, Aristotle says flourishing requires a complete life. One heroic week or one lucky year does not make a flourishing life if the rest is chaos or corruption. We judge a life by its overall arc, because our choices and habits create long-term character. Flourishing is a story with a beginning, middle, and end, not a snapshot. At the same time, Aristotle is sober about luck. You can be virtuous and still suffer disaster. A flourishing life needs some external goods, a measure of health, security, resources, and community. If a person is crushed by relentless misfortune or cut off from human relations, it is much harder for them to exercise excellence. Yet Aristotle refuses to say that fortune is everything. Virtue is not a guarantee against tragedy, but it is what allows a person to live nobly within whatever fortune they receive. In the worst storms, it is virtue that keeps the ship from breaking apart. With eudaimonia in view, Aristotle turns to virtue, because virtue is both the path to flourishing and part of what flourishing consists in. Here he distinguishes two families of excellence: moral virtues and intellectual virtues. Moral virtues shape our emotions and desires. Intellectual virtues shape our thinking. Courage, temperance, generosity, justice, gentleness, truthfulness, friendliness, and the rest are moral virtues. Wisdom, understanding, scientific knowledge, and especially practical wisdom are intellectual virtues. Moral virtue gets the heart and appetite into good order. Intellectual virtue gets the mind into good order. Flourishing requires both. How do we acquire moral virtue? Not by mere nature and not by mere lecture. We are born with the potential to feel fear, anger, desire, pleasure. But we are not born courageous or temperate any more than we are born fluent in a language. We become virtuous by habituation. We learn to be just by doing just actions, to be temperate by performing temperate actions, and so on. Habituation is not mindless repetition, it is training that shapes perception and desire. Over time, our repeated choices carve pathways in us. They make some actions easy and others hard. Virtue becomes a kind of second nature. This is why Aristotle thinks upbringing and community matter so much. The law, education, and cultural norms teach us what to fear, what to admire, what to enjoy. If you grow up in a city that celebrates greed, you will be trained to see greed as normal. If you grow up in a city that celebrates nobility and fairness, you will be trained differently. Ethics is personal, but it is never private. Your character is co-authored by the practices of your world, and then your character helps reproduce or challenge those practices when you become an adult citizen. At the heart of Aristotle's account is his claim that moral virtue is a mean between extremes. This is one of the most abused ideas in the history of ethics because people hear mean and think moderate or compromise. Aristotle's mean is not a lukewarm center. It is a proportionate excellence relative to the situation. Take fear. One extreme is cowardice, shrinking from every risk. The other is rashness, charging into danger without judgment. Courage is the mean, fearing what deserves fear, not fearing what does not, and holding steady for the sake of what is noble. Take pleasure and desire. One extreme is self-indulgence, being ruled by appetite. The other is insensibility, a deadening refusal of healthy pleasure. Temperance is the mean, enjoying bodily pleasures in ways that support rather than sabotage flourishing. Temperance does not require loathing the body. It requires the body to be a good servant rather than a tyrant. Someone who enjoys food with gratitude and self-command is temperate. Someone who compulsively chases pleasure or compulsively rejects it is not. The same structure holds across virtues. Generosity lies between wastefulness and stinginess. Truthfulness lies between boastfulness and self-deprecation. Gentleness lies between irascibility and apathetic passivity. The mean is relative to us because a large person needs more food than a small one, because the courage of a firefighter looks different from the courage of a nurse, because a parent's friendliness differs from a judge's. What matters is that reason determines the fitting response. Virtue is precision, not blandness. But what kind of reason? Here Aristotle introduces the central intellectual virtue of ethical life, phronesis, practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is not cleverness or technical expertise. It is not theoretical knowledge. It is the cultivated ability to deliberate well about what is good and expedient in a human life. It is a form of moral perception. It sees what matters in a situation, weighs ends and means, and chooses the action that fits the noble. Without practical wisdom, moral virtue is blind. You might have good impulses, yet still act poorly, because you cannot read the situation truly. Aristotle is explicit that practical wisdom grows through experience. Young people can understand ethical principles, but they lack the depth of lived cases to see how those principles apply amid complexity. Practical wisdom develops as your life gives you situations to reflect on, mistakes to learn from, examples to imitate, and hard choices that refine your judgment. This is why Aristotle thinks ethics is inseparable from practice. A purely bookish moralist is insufficient. You need a person seasoned in real decisions with real consequences. Another key point is that virtues are not isolated modules. You can't be generous in a stable way without being temperate about pleasure and just in your dealings. The virtues interlock because they are expressions of a single rationally ordered character. Aristotle therefore rejects the idea that ethics is about occasional heroic moments. It is about the kind of person you are becoming through repeated choices. If someone does a brave deed once by accident, that is admirable, but it does not yet make them courageous in character. Character is the pattern, not the exception. To make moral virtues vivid, Aristotle walks through them one by one. Courage, he says, is most clearly tested amid real danger, especially the risk of death in battle, yet it applies to any fear that might distort action. The courageous person stands firm for the sake of what is noble. A person who risks their life for money or out of rage is not courageous. They are reckless or desperate. Courage aims at the noble, not merely at survival, and not at thrill-seeking. It is steadiness in service of what is worth it. Temperance concerns pleasures that touch the body directly: food, drink, sex, comfort. These pleasures are natural and necessary, but they can rule us if untrained. The temperate person desires the right things, in the right amounts, in the right way. They are not at war with themselves. Their appetites have been educated so that excess does not glitter for them the way it does for the intemperate. In modern terms, temperance is the difference between a life where desire drives the wheel and a life where desire is disciplined into partnership with reason. Generosity governs giving and taking wealth. Aristotle insists that generosity is judged more by what you give than by what you keep, because it reveals how you regard money. A generous person gives readily for noble reasons, not resentfully and not as a performance. The wasteful person gives too much for applause or excitement. The stingy person protects their hoard as if wealth were the highest good. Generosity treats wealth as a tool for living well with others, not as the substance of meaning. It makes money secondary to character. Magnificence is generosity on a grand scale. It concerns those who have resources to fund public goods and great projects. The magnificent person spends great sums with taste and proportion, avoiding vulgar extravagance. The vice on one side is gaudy display that cares more about spectacle than worth. The vice on the other side is pettiness that refuses to commit resources even to genuinely noble causes. Magnificence is not about showing off. It is about doing great things well, so that the community benefits and beauty is created rather than clutter. Magnanimity, or great-souledness, is about honor. The magnanimous person knows their worth and seeks honor only to the extent it matches genuine virtue. They are neither hungry for praise nor deliberately self-minimizing. They accept honor as something owed to excellence, and they remain calm if honor does not arrive, in a culture driven by constant ratings and visible approval. Magnanimity is a rare kind of self-respect, a steadiness of soul that does not depend on a crowd. It is dignity without drama. Gentleness governs anger. Aristotle does not treat anger as a poison to be eliminated. Some anger is right. We ought to be angry at cruelty, corruption, betrayal. The gentle person gets angry at the right things, to the right degree, for the right duration, and in the right way. A person who cannot be made angry by injustice is not gentle, but servile. A person who flares at every slight is irascible. Gentleness is anger educated by reason and directed toward restoration rather than destruction. Truthfulness concerns how we present ourselves. On one end are boasters who exaggerate their standing. On the other are people who constantly belittle themselves or feign ignorance to avoid attention. The truthful person speaks honestly about themselves without costume. Aristotle is pointing to something psychologically deep. Our moral life includes our relationship to reality, including who we are. Lying about ourselves distorts that relationship and makes real excellence harder to sustain, because we are always acting out of fiction. Wittiness and friendliness may sound minor, but for Aristotle they matter because human beings flourish socially. The virtuous person can be pleasant without being a flatterer, witty without being cruel, friendly without being clingy. Social virtues help the community breathe. A society where people cannot speak kindly or joke decently becomes brittle and violent. Everyday habits are moral because they shape the atmosphere in which larger moral choices occur. If your daily way of being with others is sour or manipulative, big virtue will never take root. Underlying all these virtues is Aristotle's idea of the noble, to kalon. The noble is what is worth choosing for its own sake. It gives moral action its dignity and beauty. A courageous person risks life not because it is useful, but because it is noble to protect others. A generous person gives because it is noble to support the worthy. If you aim only at pleasure or advantage, virtue collapses into calculation. Virtue aims at the noble as an inner compass, a standard of worth that survives fortune. Aristotle is saying that ethics is not only about what works, but about what is worthy. The virtue that most directly expresses our life with others is justice. Aristotle calls justice complete virtue because it brings all virtues into the domain of relation. Justice is giving each their due. He distinguishes distributive justice, which concerns how a community allocates goods like honors, offices, and wealth, and corrective justice, which concerns rectifying wrongs between individuals, whether in voluntary transactions or crimes. Distributive justice requires proportionality. Equals should receive equal shares, and those who differ in relevant merit should receive different shares in proportion to that merit. Corrective justice aims at restoring balance when a wrong has been done, regardless of status. These distinctions show why justice feels both personal and structural. It is a virtue of character and also a design problem for community. Aristotle also introduces equity, epieikeia, as a supplement to law. Laws are general and cannot anticipate every particular case. Equity is the virtue of bending the letter of the law in order to fulfill its spirit when strict application would produce injustice. It is not lawlessness. It is fidelity to the aim of law. Anyone who has watched a bureaucracy injure people through rigid rule application understands why Aristotle sees equity as higher justice. It is the humane intelligence within legality. Because ethics is about choice, Aristotle analyzes voluntariness and responsibility. We praise or blame only where a person is in some sense the origin of the action. Coercion, ignorance, or extreme necessity can alter responsibility. He examines weakness of will as well. People sometimes know what is good and still fail because desire overpowers judgment in the moment. Aristotle doesn't treat this as insoluble. He sees it as the predictable outcome of disordered habits. If you repeatedly act against reason, you train yourself to be weak against desire. The cure is not a new rule, it is a new pattern. Aristotle returns to pleasure because people often think ethics means fighting pleasure. He does not. Pleasure, he says, completes activity. When you do something well, you take pleasure in it, and that pleasure is a sign of health rather than corruption. The pleasure of learning completes learning. The pleasure of friendship completes friendship. The pleasure of excellent music completes listening. The problem is disordered pleasure, loving the wrong things or loving the right things in the wrong way. The virtuous person not only acts rightly, but also enjoys acting rightly. Their pleasures have been educated to follow what is truly good. If someone can do the right deed only while hating it, Aristotle would say they are still in training. This connects to Aristotle's view of self-love. There is a selfish self-love that grabs wealth or honor regardless of others. But there is a noble self-love that seeks what is truly good for oneself. Virtue, wisdom, noble action. The noble self-lover benefits others because human flourishing is relational. To love yourself rightly is to love the goods that make you a better friend, citizen, or partner. Aristotle is rejecting the false opposition between morality and self-interest. Proper self-interest is moral because it aims at what genuinely perfects a human life. no part of Aristotle's ethics shows his relational realism more than his treatment of friendship, which occupies 2 entire books. Friendship is not optional. Without friends, he says, no one would choose to live. Even if they had all other goods, friendship is both a necessity and a context for virtue. You cannot practice generosity, justice, loyalty, patience, or truthfulness in isolation. Friendship trains and expresses character. It is where the virtues come to life. He distinguishes 3 kinds. Friendships of utility are grounded in mutual advantage. Colleagues, business partners, neighbors. Friendships of pleasure are grounded in enjoyment. Companions who like each other because time together is fun. Both are legitimate, but both are fragile because they depend on changing benefits or tastes. The highest kind is friendship of virtue, where each loves the other for who they are, and each wishes the other's good for the other's sake. This friendship is stable because it rests on character, and character is more lasting than profit or amusement. In a friendship of virtue, you are not using the other person, and you are not merely consuming them. You are sharing a life. Aristotle knows that friendship often depends on equality. When people are vastly unequal in power, age, or status, friendship still happens, but it must adjust. The lesser offers honor, the greater offers benefit. This is not cynicism. It is clarity about how social bonds work. Friendship doesn't cancel hierarchy. It humanizes it by making each party attentive to what fairness requires in their situation. Even love needs proportion. Friendship extends to family and civic life. Aristotle's claim that humans are political animals means that we are fulfilled not just in households, but in communities where we deliberate about the good. The city exists not merely for survival, but for living well. This is why Aristotle ties ethics to politics. A decent city cultivates virtue in citizens, and virtuous citizens sustain a decent city. If a community rewards vanity and domination, it will train those habits. If it rewards public spiritedness and fairness, those habits will spread. The good life is at once personal and civic. After the long tour of virtues, Aristotle ends in a way that seems at first surprising. He argues that the highest happiness is contemplation, the activity of intellect grasping truth. He says this because contemplation is the most excellent activity of reason, and reason is the most distinctive thing in us. Contemplation is also deeply self-sufficient. It relies less on fortune than political action, and it can be sustained even with modest external goods. For Aristotle, the happiest life is one where the mind lives in contact with what is timelessly true. Philosophy is not a luxury. It is the summit of human nature. This does not mean he wants us to become hermits. He is ranking forms of excellence, not abandoning the moral life. The contemplative life is the peak because it most fully realizes human rationality. But it is built on the moral virtues that make a life coherent and noble in the first place. A chaotic or corrupt character cannot contemplate well. Flourishing is layered and integrated. The person who lives justly, courageously, and temperately is preparing the soil for the mind's highest activity. What makes Aristotle's ethics so durable is that it reads like a guide to becoming a certain kind of person, rather than a manual for obeying certain rules. He assumes that moral life is like learning an art. You do not become a musician by memorizing laws of harmony. You become one by practicing scales, listening carefully, failing, adjusting, and gradually developing taste. Virtue is similar. You practice truthful speech, moderate pleasure, courageous action, fair dealing, generous giving. Over time, you develop moral taste, the ability to feel delight in the noble and disgust for the base. Ethics is a craft of the self. If you look at Aristotle from our present moment, you can feel how much of his psychology still works. We live in systems that train our habits all day long, often without our consent. Feeds train attention. Outrage trains anger. Comparison trains vanity or despair. Constant availability trains impatience. Aristotle would say, watch what you repeatedly do, because those repetitions become your character. Ethics is not just about what you believe. It is about what you do so often that it becomes second nature. If you want a different life, you must interrupt the patterns that are making you into someone you don't mean to be. He also helps separate success from flourishing. In a culture that treats wealth, fame, or dominance as proof of a good life, Aristotle asks a different question. Are those goods being used by a well-ordered soul? External goods can assist thriving, but they do not constitute it. A person can be rich and still be enslaved to appetite, cowardice, or cruelty. That is not flourishing. It is malfunction. Likewise, a person can have modest means and still flourish if their activity expresses virtue in real relationships and meaningful work. The measure is excellence of activity, not size of trophy. The doctrine of the mean offers a way out of modern polarization. We are often dragged toward extremes: indulgence or puritanism, aggression or resignation, self-assertion or self-erasure. Aristotle asks us to look for the fitting response, the noble proportion, shaped by practical wisdom. That is harder than picking a side, but it's what makes a life coherent, rather than reactive. It teaches that moral life is a craft requiring attention, humility, and practice, and that the right move is usually not the loudest one, but the most fitting one. Finally, Aristotle's ethics is hopeful without being naive. It accepts that we are vulnerable to fortune, but it insists that character is in our hands. We cannot guarantee outcomes, but we can guarantee the quality of our choices. We can become people whose emotions serve the good rather than sabotage it. People who enjoy the noble, people who build friendships that sustain virtue, people who deliberate well in private and in public. For Aristotle, the core of ethics is not a command to be someone you are not. It is an invitation to become fully human, to align desire with reason, to choose the noble, to cultivate habits that make excellence steady, and to let a whole life grow into flourishing.
Midnight rails under silver moon, dusty boots on a winding road. A shadow's the only friend I've known since she packed up and let me go. Empty whiskey bottle on the seat, her laugh still echoes in my bones. Saddle's heavy with memories. I ride alone where the wind still blows. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Sunrise paints the horizon gold, but it don't warm a lonesome soul. Every town I pass feels half her size. Every trail's haunted by goodbye. I whisper prayers to open skies, hoping someday my heart'll find a brand new path beyond the pain, where broken hearts can heal in time. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be.